Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you guys for trusting us to conduct this penetration test. We've been hard at work for the past 2 days, and we're excited to share the results with you all. So getting straight into introductions, my name is Aiden. I'm kind of the team lead, but my technical expertise is within web testing. Going down the list, we have Adam, who is our Windows and Active Directory lead, Abigail, who is our Linux expert, Julian and Tristan, who are also both web experts, and last but not least, Daniel, our cloud lead.
Yeah, so before we get into the details of the penetration test, I'd like to first go over our objectives and methodology with this engagement. So starting off, we assess the attack surface, assessing the different attack vectors, and then using our custom tooling and an agile methodology to then distribute said attack vectors to those on our team who are best equipped to handle them. Following that, we test the security of your attack vectors, such as a real threat actor would. Then in mind, keeping business integrity and availability in the forefront, make sure we're not disrupting any business operations as we're conducting our penetration test. Furthering that, then we could summarize and outline all the remediation steps and all the threat vectors that we found so that you guys can further improve your security posture. Following that, we make sure to quantify the most important part of you and to us, which is the business impact and how that can impact your customers, your reliability, your business infrastructure. Yeah, so furthermore, I'd like to also detail our scope, which was a production network, a development network, a cloud environment comprising of Azure and Entra ID tenants, all connected to a YYY.chat application. And then we also engaged in social engineering, both phishing and vishing. For our vishing assessment, we use AI to impersonate one of your employees and gain sensitive credentials. And then for the phishing, we were able to gain access to a domain joined computer through a malicious email attachment.
Okay, so our team ended up investigating over these past couple of days a series of 7 different endpoints. They're all different hosts providing different services for both your customers and you as a company, essentially. And during these endpoint assessments, we ended up finding a series of 21 different security vulnerabilities within your infrastructure. And this also includes 8 new vulnerabilities since our previous tests last year at the end in November. So we also have a vulnerability breakdown here. During our security assessments, we realized that a lot of your vulnerabilities, or more than half to be exact actually, were at least partially remediated, which is a good thing. However, we also noticed that a lot of these partially remediated vulnerabilities were very spot fix focused, meaning that essentially you'd fix a vulnerability but not fix all instances of that vulnerability, leaving other sections of your applications vulnerable to the same attacks that you just fixed. And overall, we do want to say that we do notice your increases in security and better security practices, and we appreciate them and commend you for them. But we would also like to suggest that you take further measures in the future, more security tests, and we'd be happy to help you with that later on.
I would like to cover 3 key vulnerabilities that we would like to point out today. The first has to do with a vulnerable Exchange server. Now, without getting too much into the technical jargon, this server controls all the email communications within Oui Croissant, and we were able to fully compromise the server, meaning that if we wanted to, we could read all employee communications as well as impersonate employees. Now, to respect Oui Croissant's privacy, we did not do this, but the point is that we could have, and so could an attacker. The second vulnerability is a file disclosure within the main YYY.chat web application. This allowed us to read any file on that web server. One file of importance was a database connection information. So this means that no matter how strong that database password is, since the server needs to talk to the database, and we can compromise the server, we also compromise the database and all the user data on that. Finally, was a publicly exposed password on Azure. The password that was exposed belonged to a highly privileged user in the network. This within itself is a pretty big vulnerability in our opinion, but what makes it even worse is that it is publicly exposed to the wide internet. In our opinion, it is only a matter of time before an attacker stumbles upon this vulnerability and decides to target Oui Croissant as a result.
Now, you may remember we had 21 vulnerabilities, 21 findings, but we know that the most important thing to you is your business and your users, and it's the same for us. As a result, we wanted to discuss what we believe to be the most probable and most impactful attack path, considering the vulnerabilities that we discovered. Now, as Aiden mentioned, there was a user password publicly accessible that would allow pretty much any opportunistic attacker or somebody looking to exploit Oui Croissant and its systems in order to gain access to an account, a very high privileged account that would allow them to gain access to the machine. Now, if an attacker is able to do that, we believe that they would go directly for this mail server. There's a lot of important communications happening there, all about producing your future generation of social media. But that's a really great target where an attacker could find sensitive information, credentials, source code, something like that. Not things that we look for, but certainly something to be aware of. And then the really big impact there is that, well, if an attacker is able to access this, they could probably easily be able to go to different web applications, access user data, sensitive information that we were able to find, date of birth, passwords, emails, and that's something that we believe is a really big concern for Oui Croissant and Flakebook and Oui Croissant and Y rather, and as a result is probably going to be the biggest impact and what we think should be primary cause for remediation.
Now that we've talked about the most likely way for an attacker to get into the system, I'm going to talk a little bit about the strengths. So first, one of the strengths was that Oui Croissant had really good logs on their system. So despite all of the vulnerabilities, we are confident that should something happen due to these vulnerabilities, Oui Croissant would be able to effectively respond to them because of the logs, in-depth logs that were collected. And also, the remote access protocols were secured. We examined them for common vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, but we did not find any of them, and that's good because remote access protocols are usually the easiest way for attackers to gain access to a system. And finally, containerization. Every service on every host on the systems were isolated in a sandbox, and this means that if one service should be compromised, the entire host isn't necessarily compromised, and that's what we found in the report.
Following our assessment, we came up with 3 recommendations that we strongly suggest your company implement to improve their security posture. The first is continuous security assessments, so having pen tests more regular, because in cybersecurity, threats are always popping up, and you want your company to be prepared to deal with those newer threats. Secondly, we suggest that you enhance your password policy by requiring more length and complexity. Since if even one password can be obtained by an attacker, they can gain access to your whole network and do a lot of damage to your new company. Finally, we recommend that you train your employees on being aware of phishing attacks, because actually employees are usually the weakest link in a company's security posture. And in fact, 84% of employees in the study were found to fall prey to a phishing email within 10 minutes. So if you can train users to know not to click on phishing emails or give away credentials, then you can minimize any initial disruptions to your network. We're very thankful that we had the chance to do this pen test for your company, and we believe that you're headed in a positive direction if you can implement these remediations that we've suggested. We're now happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much. So, I was interested with the recommendation around passwords. My team is encouraging us to move towards a frictionless authentication. Would you guys agree with that relative to what you shared with us?
Do you happen to know what the frictionless authentication method
FIDO2
is?
passkeys.
Sorry?
FIDO2 passkeys.
Yeah, so that's a great way of introducing two-factor authentication, especially if your employees are remote. It's one way to prevent external access, or at least mitigate external access, because you're going to have to require that second piece of authentication physically. And we think that would be a great alternative to something like the typical two-factor authentication on a mobile phone or something like that.
Agreed. And what about more strategically, they're encouraging us to kind of